I rose my hand eagerly to answer, and then I started stuttering just due to my kind of like sensitivity around the folks we were around and all that. And the class laughed at me, and the teacher said, "Oh, don't mind him. His people talk like that." And my mother being a black woman from England, and my father being Puerto Rican and Dominican, never taught me how to speak Spanish. So like I didn't know that identity. I'm like, my people, like, what does that mean? So the librarian heard about it at the school and gave me her original copy of the autobiography of Malcolm X in 4th grade. And I read that joint in 4th grade or 5th grade, 6th grade, or whatever. But through that process, like, people point to the time that they started noticing things like the reality, the structure, not, you know what I mean? And it's, for me, it's like, I don't really remember when that happened. I just knew that it was always there. And if anything, I had to like prevent myself from forgetting that.
Older, because I'm just more mature, I have a bit more knowledge, more emotionally stable.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? More able to handle whatever he's throwing at me. So like when he says no, I allow him to say no, you know, because he's a human with autonomy. So you want him, like, I don't let him say no to everything, but every now and then when he wants to say no, I'm like, okay, and explain why the no, as much as he can for a 3-year-old, but it's not just, no, it's going to be my way, all that, because you realize, like, he's a human, and there's going to be resistance to that, even at no matter what age, like, people want to do what they want to do, so you have to just kind of create a boundary and a guideline for them, but not trying to box them in to where you're creating this person, based on the world as you see it. That's like,
you gotta ask them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
My youngest is 9, so we just got over that hump, so it's no joke, bro.
Yeah, and you got all boys, right?
Yeah. 4. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Whoa.
Yeah.
I didn't know you had 4.
Yeah, 17, 16, 13, and 9.
Okay.
The 9-year-old's the girl try.
Congratulations, man.
Yeah.
That's a lot, man. I respect people so much that have just done life with children. You just, before you have kids, you just don't know. You just don't know.
Yeah, it's a whole nother game, bro.
Yeah, you don't know what you don't know until you have to, like, oh, I was barely lifing,
Yeah.
So you have responsibility for someone else and all the stress that comes with that, trying to move through the world, especially like someone like you, what you're doing.
Yeah, man.
And trying to raise a family. It's like, whew, shout out to you.
And my wife runs 2 homeless shelters in the city, and she's finishing up her doctorate right now. So hopefully, greener pastures ahead. But them first 10 years, 12 years was no joke.
Yeah. Oh man, congratulations for making it, bro. Real. Shout out to you, and thanks for coming in. So let me start with the intro here. Today I believe is episode 43. All right, so welcome back to the Awakened Avoidant. Today is episode 43. We bring to you another deposit on the journey towards generational health. Today we have Mr. Ismael Jimenez. I'm going to let Ismael give us his credentials because I looked it up and the credentials are so long. If you don't mind leading with your credentials, sir.
Well, first, I just, I have a master's degree in education. I have been an educator for over the last 18 years, ranging from preschool to post-secondary. I also, along with teaching middle school and teaching high school, I've had the pleasure of also teaching in teacher preparation programs from LaSalle University, Villanova University, and also the University of Pennsylvania, along with giving guest talks at like Swarthmore and Princeton and Harvard, being involved in curriculum development there. So, education's my drill, man. So I've been doing that for a minute now.
Yeah, absolutely. So now I got to big you up in the biggest way possible. So I've known you since we were kids. I could have been like, you think we were like, I was like probably like 6 or something maybe?
Yeah.
Probably like that young, like 6 years old. This is when we lived in, well, we don't got to say where, but everyone that I knew was a bunch of boys. You had your parents were both in a home, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so you had both parents in a home, but in the ville where we lived at, it was like basically, young black kids, no dad. I didn't know anyone that had a dad, besides for you personally. But you always been on what you're on currently as far as would you consider it a fight or a representation or?
Well,
How would you describe it?
I would consider it like part of just like a tradition of, fighting against not only a generalized idea of a system, but like kind of a specific kind of opposition to the affirmation of people's lives like us. And I just knew it at a young age, partly based on like a real rough experience I had at fourth grade at a school around that time when I knew you, or met you and your brother when we were children. And from that experience, it definitely informed my orientation to kind of like not accept certain constructs and concepts about what others think who I am.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, makes sense. Whereas like you broke free from that, and a lot of us were, held captive by that, myself included, for a long time, until you realize like, oh, this is it's something different. It could have been or should have been something different. My identity is something that it probably shouldn't be, based upon, things that were projected upon me.
Yeah.
But I wanted to say that I don't know anyone, like I know few people personally that have done anything as long as I've done. Like I've been working out since I was 15 years old. I don't know anyone that's consistently, I'm sure there's plenty of people, but I don't know many. But either way, you have been consistently dedicated yourself to that ever since we were kids. It's unbelievable. It's unfathomable to see somebody that committed and dedicated to something. So man, it's for real. Big up, shout out to you. In my eyes, you're him. You're the Kobe of that, for real.
I appreciate
like,
that.
You're him, because I don't, like I'm sure plenty of people in your circle that, dedicate themselves and do what you do. So shout out to them too. But for me, you're him.
I appreciate
You're
it, bro.
him. So
And I gotta say, the experience, that I had in fourth grade was I was at a school, back then in them schools, man, there was like 2 black kids in your class if you're lucky. And I just remember the teacher at the time asking us a question, and the question was like, I don't even remember the specifics of it, but I raised my hand eagerly to answer it, and then I started stuttering just due to my kind of like sensitivity around the folks we were around and all that. And the class laughed at me, and the teacher said, "Oh, don't mind him. His people talk like that." And my mother being a black woman from England, and my father being Puerto Rican and Dominican, never taught me how to speak Spanish. So like, I didn't know that identity. I'm like, my people, like, what does that mean? So the librarian heard about it at the school and gave me her original copy of the autobiography of Malcolm X in fourth grade. And I read that John in fourth grade or fifth grade, sixth grade, whatever. But through that process, like, people point to the time that they started noticing things like the reality, the structure, not, you know what I mean? And it's, for me, it's like, I don't really remember when that happened. I just knew that it was always there. And if anything, I had to like prevent myself from forgetting that. And, of course, throughout life, I'm 43 years old right now, there's like this. But I realized that juncture in my existence kind of thrusted me into, forward in my life beyond what I could even comprehend at the time of actually first picking up that book and reading it. And it has informed my kind of fight, for lack of a better term, or commitment to fighting for, the liberation of black folks, to fight for the liberation of all oppressed people around the world, man.
yeah. Yeah, I'm glad that you used the word fight too, and for lack of a better word, because I couldn't think of one either. But it is that, but you want to call it something else. But yeah, commitment is a great. Yeah, so I don't know anyone that's been as committed as you to that since a child, because you meet people like out in the world. You hear people say like, yeah, I know since I was a kid. But I don't know, like I never met these people that have been doing this thing since they were a kid. Like maybe Nas was rapping since he was 6 or something, like that story.
I'm sure he was.
But yeah, exactly. But you're the Nas of that, like for real. Like, do you personally know people that have been, that were thrusted into who they are today?
Yeah, I mean, I know a couple people, first I want to shout out my homie, Sharif El-Mekki,
Okay.
CEO of the Center of Black Educator Development. His parents, raised him, both of them were Panthers back in the day, brought him to Iran after the revolution. because, their distrust of what was happening on here and their commitment to, religion that they co-signed, Islam. And, his commitment is an extension of that. And you're right, there's very few people have been brought, and even people who have been brought up into those circumstances still like push back or question that throughout, which of course I did also. But to see someone dedicated for the affirmation of humanity based on that, like, yeah, Sharif Al-Mekki for me is the example that I look at. I'm like, all right, homie, like that's the work. And you do meet a couple people here and there, but for real, like there's a reason why we're not exposed to these ideas. Like from a young age, I didn't learn about Carter G. Woodson until I was 27 years old. That man is the father of Black history. He's the one that started like Black History Week, became Black History Month, but we never learned them. Yeah. All them years they had Black history and they talking about Martin Luther King and Madam C.J. Walker and all them folks. We didn't learn about the man who started it. I didn't learn about James Baldwin until I was 25. And I loved, Black history since I was like in 4th grade. So it's like, how can you contextualize your reality, make sense of who you are if there's only a certain limited scope or lens that you're even being shown who you are? And sometimes that's tainted from other people's perspective of who you should be based on their own type of worldview or caricature of your reality. So
yeah, you're right. And then you begin to identify with something that's not you at all. Like you said, it's just someone else's. This is what that is. But I wanted to ask you, since you touched on it right there, what do you think that reason is? Like, why is that?
Well, number one, I think it speaks to kind of the mythology of what this whole conception of civilization, of this society is all about. So it goes against this idea, number one, that this place was founded on freedom, right? You can't talk about, Thomas Jefferson having children with his dead wife's half sister who was a slave that he started grooming probably when she was like 10, 12 years old and started having relations when she was 13 and he was 38. That's the same man that wrote All Men Are Created Equal in Philadelphia, you know what I mean? And when you start to look at those contradictions and you're starting to point them out, it changes the whole story, because no longer is it kind of like, well, I'm standing up for American values. American values have always built on like Christianity and this. Yeah, there were Christians that used the Bible, even rewrote the Bible to justify the way they treated people and would teach that to people. You know what I mean? So like what we are taught, what we are shown has an intellectual genealogy rooted in anti-Blackness. It has an intellectual genealogy rooted on white supremacy. And, as I grow and learn, it becomes even deeper. So like, I just learned like Foreign Affairs magazine, when it was first started in 1914, was called the Journal of Race Development, because they looked at international relations on the way how, what region, were you in a tropical region, therefore your brain can't develop like it could like a European. And they would base international policies upon that, even arguing people can govern themselves or couldn't govern themselves, which i.e. became like the intellectual foundation of colonialism. And so like when we look at these structures and these ideas, they haven't really necessarily gone. They have been rooted within the very fabric of our idea of who we are. And we don't talk about it. I mean, 18 states have passed laws that say you can't talk about that. So you think about that reality, it's like, it's less of a question of like purposeful malice by folks, I would argue. It's more of kind of like, well, this is the way it is, and your deviation from what we think it is wrong and therefore dangerous to the conception of this reality. And, not to get too abstract, I think that this contributes to kind of like, I'm teaching what I have been taught. I'm regurgitating what I think to be true, and what I think to be true is usually, manipulated from media, manipulated from moneyed interests that have an interest to maintain status quo or maintain a kind of structure and system based on extraction and exploitation, which is the very foundation and root of how this society was formed. So I think I wouldn't say it's necessarily purposeful from most of the people involved with perpetuating those ideas, but I definitely think that it is part and parcel in kind of, you know, being part and indoctrinated within the society.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, that makes sense. From the beginning, you know, the root of it was more than likely intentional, and now it's perpetuated either knowingly or unknowingly, just to maintain the status quo. Yeah, and
Yeah.
not to fight. And you're like a representation of someone that's fighting against that. Yeah, which,
Yeah.
yeah, appreciate you. I wanted to thank you too, because you know a lot of us, you know, myself included, we know what's going on out there. We have an idea, not to the extent that you do. So thanks for coming on and informing people. But we have an idea, but that fight, you know, for lack of a better word, again, it's so the task seems so daunting, and most people don't know where to begin, or you just have so much going on in your life. So to have someone like you that's out there representing people, you know, in our best interests, that's a great look, you know. So we appreciate you for doing the work for, you know, for those of us that can or can't, you know, by choice or not by choice.
Yeah.
It's a lot. It's quite the undertaking that you're taking on, man. So
Yeah.
like
I mean, and it goes back to a tradition, like as an educator, right? There's a long line of educators that have dedicated their lives. So one example I always bring up is when you actually like read some of the interviews of civil rights leaders back in the day of what we known as the modern civil rights movement, but you can even bring it back further to that, to the beginning of what we would consider the civil rights movement. They always point to their teachers. They always point to the folks who exposed them to certain ideas that they never heard of before, that activated them to kind of face the world, to be active and not to be passive within that circumstance. I think so much is shown to us in a way where people just seem like they passively accepted it or they had to do what they had to do. No, there always has been people actively pushing back, people actively fighting back, and we're not shown that. And so if we're not shown that, how do we build off an example? How do we learn from the lessons that they learned through their long lives? So like one example I always point out also on top of that is like W.B. Du Bois. He's always presented to us as someone, you know, opposite of Booker T. Washington, and him and Marcus Garvey had beef. But if you look at Du Bois, the man lived 93 years. And Du Bois went out of his way to make it very clear to folks as towards the end of his life, like he moved out of America. He settled in Ghana. He was totally disillusioned from his idea that he began with, that like just fighting for democracy, fighting for rights, that people would be compelled to kind of change their behavior. Same thing like Martin King. And at the end of the day, they realized that regardless of all that, most people still held into the most problematic pathologies of anti-Blackness in this society and across the world, regardless of how much you teach them. But have we learned from that? Have we gained new insights to like try to configure ourselves, especially in a time of age now that there's so many mirages and camouflages, in the sense of like, you know, our bubbles, what media is shown to us, who owns that media, and it just goes down.
Yeah, you're right. It's controlled. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, definitely. And even when they say like numbers don't lie, that's not really true. You know, it depends on who's controlling those numbers, especially with, you know, media space. Like
Yep.
they promote messages they want to promote. We know that they can manipulate that. The message that they want you to hear is the message that you're going to get,
Yep.
whether it's popular or not. You're getting it if that's what they want you to get. So trying to fight that. But you're also correct about exposure. You said you weren't exposed to James Baldwin until 25.
Yeah.
I'm like 40. I only just found out who James Baldwin was like recently.
Yep.
And then you start to get to know him, and you're like, you know, it's like amazing when you hear this man speak. And I wanted to tell you that this whole situation is partly inspired by, I'll say, a clip of an exchange between Nikki Giovanni, is her name, and
Yep.
James Baldwin,
Yep.
where they're going back and forth. You know, it's an intellectual combo. And I believe it was James Baldwin who said, "What is a black man to do in this world?" And Nikki Giovanni plainly just says, "Create something." That's it. So powerful, bro. I was
Yep.
like, create something. And I
Yep.
was like, you know what? Yeah, I'm gonna do that.
Yep.
So yeah, just being exposed to something that's uplifting. Without that, what do you do? Where do you go? I wanted to ask you a question. How does it feel to be the person, like, going from your childhood and all the knowledge and information that you gain, how does it feel to be the guy that's responsible for like shaping the culture and the minds and just doing what you do, just having that power?
I mean, number one, I didn't seek no power like that. Number two, I think growing up in around folks like I did, white folks that I did, I've been that allowed me to be much more clear as I got older about what I'm dealing with. Whether it be like people who I used to consider friends, and I remember back and they used to tell me like, your lips so big, chapstick needs a spray.
Yeah.
Stuff like, those slick comments.
Yeah.
And, reflecting back, it just like informed me of how to navigate, how to be clear. So like when I'm in a situation now, I can read it much more clear because I haven't been racially isolated, just with one group of people. And if I have been, at a large part of my youth, it was those were white folks. And navigating that and then becoming clear at such a young age, and then like peeping game as I got older, allowed me to just like be very clear, be like, oh, okay, like that's you probably believe this about me before I even say anything to you. You probably think that like these are the ideas that I represent, which are usually oversimplified, usually generalized. And so when I hit you off with like what I actually do know, what type of nuanced ideas I'm aware of, it messes up folks' mind about who they think you are. And that has been a great benefit to me, but also it has allowed me to kind of navigate treacherous waters in a way. It was like, I'm probably, if I'm getting attacked, I probably was expecting that. I actually am surprised I haven't gotten as much pushback that I think I should be receiving
Yeah.
at this point. So.
Why do you, there's another question. Why do you think that is? Why do you, because and this is just me as someone that consumes your content and, likes and enjoys it. For me, I think it's like the tone in which you deliver it, and how you deliver it, because it's not aggressive, I think that probably impacts how people receive it.
Yeah.
And I think it has a lot to do with the delivery, because it's just like, okay, I'm just absorbing this, I'm receiving this message. It's like you're like bringing something to us as a gift rather than like forcing it down some, like this is what it is. But I wanted to ask you, why do you think that you don't get the pushback?
I mean, I benefit from light skin privilege.
You think so?
Yeah, definitely do, bro. And even like when people see my last name, I say Jimenez because I don't speak Spanish, but it's pronounced Jimenez, right?
Yeah.
And I think that leaves that kind of like, for some folks who just see the surface image stuff, it's like, it leads to like kind of like confusion. Since I'm light skinned, I don't seem like the angry black man as much. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm fully aware of that. I actually have also benefited from such.
Yeah.
At the same time, it is very clear to me that I learned skills to explain these concepts to diverse audiences, to speak to a white person who's trying to be a good person. You know what I mean? Like, don't get it twisted. Like, people do want to be good people, and it's like, well, if you're a good person, if you don't know that black people were never meant to be free in this society, can you be a good person in this society without knowing that? Or do you start to get, oh, well, it's because, single parent, this poverty, and it's, and it's like, well, those are racist tropes about how people are people. There's white single mothers out there. There's more white people live in poverty than black people in this society. So when you start to get to there, and it's like, well, it sounds like you're saying something's wrong with black people. And when you're saying that something's wrong with black people, that is the very essence, the very core of anti-blackness. And so you have to like understand that when you look at things on the surface, that a lot of people are just trying to figure out themselves in this very confusing situation. And unfortunately, a lot of, our folks have adopted the definitions imposed upon them, like we were referring to earlier, and that becomes their identity. So like when I became a teacher, over a decade ago, almost 2 decades now, I think of I came in there with eyes wide open. Like I purposely picked a school that was racially isolated, most, only black kids. I taught a required subject, African American history. And I came in with like, yo, like we need to talk about what it is, why the situation is as it exists. And I learned very quickly that number one, those are some of the most brilliant people I ever met in those classrooms. And at the same time, they came in already kind of knowing a baseline about that, yet still unable to like embrace those nuances. And over time, even like as I continued my teaching, I ended up teaching more diverse audiences. I had my first white student 5 years in. I had, Puerto Rican, Dominican students and Jamaican and Haitian and folks from the Ivory Coast all in the same class talking about kind of this society, who people think they are, why things are the way they are. And I learned so much from my students, so much so that I've been able to more clearly articulate to diverse audiences in a way where it's like a baseline understanding, which I think has been very useful in kind of getting clear on things that even as a child I try to speak on, where I was just brushed away as a tolerable deviant. Oh, that's just Ishmael talking smack. It's like, no, I'm talking smack and I know what I'm talking about now. And then there's no coincidence. A lot of those people turn around and say I'm racist against white folks, which is just real interesting. Like, y'all called me Ishmael X when I was a child. Do you know what that meant?
Yeah.
But like now, even knowing even deeper what that means, I understand how those conclusions, unfortunately, have been made by folks who I used to consider friends.
Yeah. Yeah, that to me, without knowing much about it, it just seems like the easy way out. It's just an easy way to get out of the conversation. Oh, you're racist. Like, come on, bro. Like,
Yeah.
come on, man. It's like, if you understand how racism, what it means, like the power, you know what I'm saying.
Yep.
But either way, no, that's not a thing. But yeah, you do hear that a lot for people just to exit that sort of conversation. It's just an easy go-to. But I wanted to shift real quick to ask you about damn, I had a question I wanted to ask you. I asked you about Nikki Giovanni and the thing. Don't worry, we'll edit this part. Damn, I forget the question I wanted to ask you. Something about where you started, power, kids. That's all right. When you're delivering the message to people that are not of the same color to you. Oh, I know what I wanted to ask you. Like, I feel like growing up, I sense personally, and this is just me, it doesn't have to be true, obviously, that there was some anger, from you, or maybe some resentment. And I guess there probably was, because you spoke on your upbringing. So and it seems like now, as you developed into who you are now, that I imagine that it still exists, but it's not at the center of who you are as you're delivering the message. So I just wanted to ask you, like, how did you come into that space?
Well, I mean, I had to get over the trauma. Trauma's a real thing, you know what I mean? I also had to see the world more, growing with age. Our brains don't even fully develop till we're 25, 28. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like I had to live and experience life and also, test out my theories a little bit that I developed as a child. I wanted to become a teacher since I was 16 because I knew I loved education, but I hated school. And it's like, why is that? I had to like go out into the world and see that because I knew I wanted to be in a classroom and talk about the things that we're talking about right now with folks, and to actually live that experience, to actually go through that gives you a whole nother angle about it because no longer are you like abstracting it or theorizing. It's the real messy, on the ground, unclear type of reality. And a lot of it, I had my ideas were affirmed. And a lot of it, I had to go back to the drawing board. But with all those combinations, that definitely has informed kind of like why I feel like it's less of being angry now and more being like clear. And I think that's that's the best way I can describe it, with another lack of a better term, right? Because don't forget, we are confined to the limitations of our language to describe like very nuanced ideas, and that's how I feel about it. And you know, don't get it twisted. I do get angry, you know, but I get angry every morning when I ride the subway to work in Philadelphia and what I see. I get angry when I read the comments, unfortunately, from articles I should never read the comments about, and watch TV. And it just reminds me, like, wow, like this idea that things are getting better, this idea that we're the arc of justice always been, you know, the arc of history always bends towards justice, the code king. It's much more complicated than that. And I know as much as you, we all do play a role in what that actually means in real terms. And it ain't easy, it ain't pretty. But at the same time, it's like we gotta be honest with that.
Okay.
And that's what reminds me. It's like, I'm not here to tell you, you know, I have all the right answers, but I'm going to ask you, if you think you had the answer, explain to me why you think that is so. And I'm going to tell you my own conception of reality. And if we're actually engaged in like a real dialogue and a real conversation, which is like intersubjectivity, where you're listening, they're listening, kind of like when we're in a lunchroom when we were kids, into the stories, trying to add our opinions, trying to build off of each other. Then you actually start to realize people are people to people, and being able to be honest intellectually, but also emotionally, you can actually get somewhere. And I've seen it happen. Unfortunately, we live in bubbles more than ever before. So I don't even talk to them. I don't talk to a lot of folks like that anymore, just off the strength of their own conception. So
yeah, I wanted to ask you, like, this exchange and dialogue and the openness between both parties. Do you feel like that's happening in society as a whole, or do you feel like that's only happening, like you said, in bubbles or in certain spaces where these ideas are being exchanged?
yeah, it happens in bubbles, and it's even more so with social media. I think even more so with the way our society is like become more polarized. And when I say more polarized, I'm not just talking about whites and blacks. I'm talking about whites. You know, most of the time when I'm hearing these debates on TV about, you know, the upcoming presidential election, I'm like, it sounds like white folks are arguing with one another and using folks of color as pawns in their arguments.
Yeah, you're right about that.
Yeah, and it just becomes wild to me because, like, even that, it's like, again, goes back and it's like, when did this country ever meant for black people to be free? What year was that? What policies purposely were enacted? What policies now are being attacked? You know, we're having a situation now where even the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court has said that, you know, oh, racism, that's in the past, that's over. And it's like, you don't see the systematic, institutional type of reality that many people have gone through. And why is there a disproportionate representation of black men in prison? If you start telling me it's because black people commit more crimes, again, you fall into that anti-blackness. Well, all people arguably commit crimes in some regard, but like, what's the target? What's the emphasis? What is, who gets the worst punishments? And disproportionately affects black people. And our society is not honest with that. They don't even want to really reconcile those realities, to the point now, it's like, I even question, is reconciliation even possible? Because every time I hear about that now, it's steeped into this idea of black people getting over it. You just need to stop complaining. Look at Oprah. Look at Obama. Yeah. Just pull up your pants. Get your life together. What are you complaining about? Get a job. And it just feeds into this idea that something is wrong with our folks. And our children, it's internalized from a young age. Before you even know how to write out your name, it's like that is known. And nobody taught it. Our parents didn't sit us on a lap and be like, this is what this society thinks about black people, and this is what they'll probably impose upon you. No, it's like, it's even internalized by them. And so when we're trying to make sense of this, at one time there was a tradition in this society amongst black folks that recognized, like, they lying about you. Not only are they lying about you, but you're great. you can be great regardless of the circumstances. And I feel like that isn't necessarily being pumped in the sense of what the society represents. It's being pumped in the sense of assimilating into this society. If you feel that something's wrong, you can just fight against it. And it's like, yeah, but like, you still don't want to reconcile that reality in which created these circumstances. You want to talk around it and then turn around and say, well, you're the problem. You're the racist one now. Which, if you keep game with a lot of folks right now, that's what they're arguing against black people.
Yeah, reconciliation. You said you made a lot of great points. I personally feel like, and anyone knows this to be true, just based on how something is built. Like, if something is from the ground up, is built, if it's rooted in something negative or bad, if you were building a bridge and one of the legs are weak, you know what I mean? That structural problem is always going to be there, and the only thing that you can do is tear it down and start over. You know, so that's what you mean by reconciliation. That's what it would have to look like. But who wants to do that when people benefit from the way something is? You know, so like forcing people to get there, you know, that's the work. That's the work that you're doing.
And it's like, do you want to be a good person in this society? Do you really believe that humanity, everybody is equal? Do you really want to see that in reality? You know, and like you said, that's easier said than done. It's easier to say, oh, that is like the abstract dream that we're headed towards, rather than admit that there's been a consistent kind of backlash to whatever progress is made, right? We can see that after Reconstruction. We can see that after the Civil Rights Movement. We can see that after George Floyd. Like, we're living through a backlash right now. And so all those issues combine in some type of way where it's like, okay, and
you're right about that. The backlash to what I won't call it a revolt, but to resistance. You know, there's definitely a response to that you can feel that permeates. Yeah, you're right about that. You're dropping gems on me right now, G.
No, listen, bro.
That's what I do. You're dropping gems on me. You know, when people say that they like to say like institution, that doesn't exist, and be like, to me, just to simplify that idea for me, I just break it down to the green. Like, okay, but institutions are ran by people, right? And people are racist. So
a product of the
exactly. So how, you know what I mean? Like, just by that simple math, of course they can be institutional. You know what I mean? And institutions are in large run by who? You know, so obviously it exists.
Yeah, and I think, you know, we live in such a society and dominant culture that emphasizes the individual. So much so where it's like, oh, well, I'm not, you know, I voted for Obama. It doesn't matter, I'm voting for Trump. You know what I mean? We live in a society now that, you know, also kind of like puts it into the way where folks are like, well, I don't, you know, my neighbor is black, you know, we're good. You know what I mean? Like, the issue isn't me, it's you talking about the issue.
Yeah, you're the problem.
You're the problem. And again, feeds right back into that kind of like anti-blackness, something's wrong with black people type of situation. They're just complaining. Like, there's no issues, there's no barriers. And you look around collectively to our folk, you know, at 1863, even before the end of slavery, black people in America had 0.5% of the wealth. Right now, black people collectively have 1.5% of the wealth. So you're talking about a percentage point over all those years up until now. And then it's sold to us as all we got to do is like replicate Elon Musk. And our children bought to that. You know, their favorite rapper talks about that. That's put out there by a major corporation that has very, you know, interests that are ran by human beings that have a blind spot to that. A lot of folks don't read. And then also on top of that, right? And then on top of that, what we're shown is usually marketed to us, to our biased program, our biased ideas. So we buy things and we like sensationalist headlines, and that sells. And since the number one priority of a CEO that runs a corporation is to maximize profits, and then corporations own the very means of ideas 6 companies on 90% of the media that is put in front of us, print, TV, entertainment, where it becomes like a certain narrative that, you know, what are we actually learning here? What are we actually taking in? And then how does that look like in real life?
Yeah, you're right. You're learning and taking in what they want you to learn and take in. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, me too, as far as what you made a point there about reading. I was one of those people that just in like, were you always like an avid reader? Because did you always have this thirst for knowledge?
Yeah, like I said, it was a little bit before I read the autobiography, but after I read the autobiography of Malcolm X, man, I picked up like Susan B. Anthony biography. You know, I started picking up all these biographies about people because it turned into me as like I need to like soak in what they learned and make sense out of that while I'm trying to make out sense out of my own life when there was so much, you know, mirages and camouflages, and by doing that, it just set me on that path where, like, I would get an F in a class or a D in a class and barely pass, but I'm at home watching the news. I was watching news as like a 13-year-old, going home watching the news on Sunday mornings was my stuff on PBS, and it just turned into something that I would try to articulate this to folks, and they would be like, "Oh, well, you don't know about this. What about this?" And I wasn't able to answer that. And so that also encouraged me to be like, okay, I need to learn that, because how can I talk about any of this if I don't know that? And it just spiraled into what it is today.
Yeah. Do you think at that age, was it a lack of care, or did you just not connect to the things that they were sharing? Like, if none of the information relates to you or resonates, I imagine that you're going to be disconnected from it.
Oh yeah, that's exactly what it is. I mean, like our kids go through that now in schools, where a lot of times, especially in history or social studies classrooms, you have people just getting up there and saying what their worldview is. Like they love military history of World War II, and that's what you spend most of the year learning about. And it's a very narrowed lens, especially from the experience from that person who's in front of you. Like, where did they grow up? Who do they interact with? What books did they read? Like, even avid readers who just focus on like World War II Eurocentric conceptions of war. That's what they're going to focus on. And it doesn't necessarily make them bad people. It's like, yeah, you're well read, but like, what about this? What about that? Like, what about, you know, Germany's genocide in Namibia in the 1910s and the 1920s? Like, do we talk about that beforehand? That preceded the Holocaust, and that kind of like, oh, I never knew. What about Congo with King Leopold II? And once you get to those guts of it, you start to realize and like, oh, okay, that's why.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was exposed to, like, I was the same as you. You're describing my life. I just never dug in the way you dug in until now. And I think it has to do with the access to information for me. Like, it's a little bit easier to access and kind of parse through and figure out what resonates with me. Where in school, you just
checking off a box.
Yeah, you're just getting what they're giving you, and like trying to, when we were growing up, trying to go find other information outside of like going to the library and doing the catalog thing. That old school prehistory was like, I don't know if I'm doing that at that age. I wasn't doing that. So now, being exposed to different things. You posted something the other day. How do you say the fella's name again? I don't want to mess it up. Is Ta-Nehisi?
Yeah, Ta-Nehisi Coates.
Ta-Nehisi Coates.
Yeah.
His book. What was the recent book? What's the one that you're reading, actually?
The Message.
Okay, what was the one prior to that?
The prior one was the one he did about, we had 8 years in the White House about Barack Obama, but the one before that was Between the World and Me.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Between the World and Me. Yeah, so I don't know if I read that at your suggestion or not. I don't know if you posted about it, but you may have. But either way, I read it and didn't finish it. But I just wanted to say that his writing style, man, it just cuts so deep. It's so visceral. I always wondered, what is it about these people that allows him to express what they're feeling or convey it in this way? Or when they talk about people that write and they say he's so colorful, like that didn't mean anything to me as a kid. I didn't understand it. I didn't have it to understand. But now when you read it, you're, oh, that's what they mean. So that part, you posted something about his it was like a little clip of him. What was an interview that he did with Trevor Noah the other day?
Yeah.
And I just wanted to ask you. This is going way off topic, but what did you think about that?
I thought it was a fantastic interview. Number one, a lot of people focus on his book because he has a chapter dedicated about his experience going to the occupied territories in the West Bank. But if you actually read the book, he's talking about his love of writing. He's talking about his first trip to Africa, to Senegal, and his anxiety around that, because how he was raised in a household that venerated Africa, that talked about it in very mythological terms, and his fear of it not being like that, or what it meant, and like who he is in relation. Like, he's wrestling through that. And just to read his honestly intellectual honesty, it's just like, wow. Like, he's really expressing in writing in a way that is understandable a very complex idea that is not necessarily have a conclusion. Like, he's not necessarily concluding anything. He's wrestling with it for you to wrestle with him. And that book within itself, and even Between the World and Me, about to his son, those type of things speak to kind of like, trying to make sense out of this world from a perspective that comes from, a tradition of, Black radicalism, comes from a tradition of Black writers kind of trying to see beyond the veil, like Du Bois called it, like see beyond what is put in front of you. Also, how not to quote Du Bois too much, but like what he called the double consciousness, was like always looking at yourself through the eyes of a world that looks on to you with amusement and pity, and measuring your soul against that tape. And I think like folks like Ta-Nehisi Coates who take that on, who take that kind of like responsibility on of like being able to articulate behind the veil, to say like, oh, well, like, why is it like this? Why is it like that? This is what it compares to what it means to actually stand up for justice. Because, like, let's be honest, would this society really even understand the concepts of what we consider freedom today without Black folks fighting for it? It's not like they went out, it's not like George Washington, the slave owner, was like the freedom fighter for everybody. But Harriet Tubman was. Martin King was, Ella Baker was, you know what I mean? And those are the examples as much as anything we point to in this society. Yeah, they might have got some inspiration from that, but they took it to what it actually should be, not what other folks were saying when they're saying, oh, well, I need the freedom to be able to steal land. I need the freedom in order to enslave people. I need the freedom to extract and exploit based on my own personal individualistic interest. And, Black folks in this country have always stood in opposition of that, at least in a collective sense, and also represented that counter narrative of what it actually means to be free.
Yeah, I feel like you captured that perfectly. I don't know personally if I would have been able to ascertain or gather that from his writing without him speaking on it in that interview, because I'm trying to figure that out myself, exactly what he's trying to convey, like, I guess I'm wrestling too, I'm wrestling at a different level with him, but yeah, his idea, him lifting the veil and kind of wrestling with his identity based on his perception of himself, like conditioning, and then figuring out, and then him realizing that he's seeing the world through that, like you said, the double consciousness. So basically, everything that you said is pretty much what he's doing in that book, and you're like, oh, this is, it's deep, bro. Like, I don't even have a better word for it than deep, because I'm still like, you know what I mean? Like, growing to understand it myself. So like, as far as development goes in a sense of self and, where I exist as a Black person in this world, I'm probably coming to that a little bit later, because you know how it is when when you're growing up in this area, you're kind of running away from that a little bit, because the weight of that is so much, and trying to like, if you battle that while you're amongst this people, it's gonna be a lot, you know, like that fight, that's the only word that we keep using. It is a fight, you know, for freedom. It just is, like, no matter what, it's a fight. It's a fight to liberate yourself, to get knowledge, to everything. Everything's a fight, you know, waking up every morning to get to the gym.
Yeah.
That's a fight, you know.
Yes,
so,
it is.
Yeah, everything's a fight.
Yeah.
So yeah, man, I appreciate you sharing that and just dropping that bit of information out there for us to pick up.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah,
No doubt.
yeah, you're the man, G. I hope that do you feel like you're leading something? This is just a random question too. Or do you feel like, I know you're a part of something. Do you feel like you're at the forefront of something?
No, not necessarily.
No?
You know, I just feel, you know, it's a responsibility at this point. Like, and one thing I always, you know, told my students is like, I want to get you to the point. It's easy to ignore this stuff because you have to go out your way to figure it out. And like, it's easy just to like go through life, go through the motions, not really care about that. But I want to get you to a point where it's harder to ignore it than to deal with it. And, you know, that's just been where I've been at for a while. It's like, I don't know what else to do. It just becomes a part of what it is. So I definitely don't want to put like label of like any type of like, you know, leader or anything like that, because I don't necessarily think that even captures it. I definitely view myself as part of a tradition of Black educators that have always been talking this, that have been trying to expose Black children, but not also Black children, all children, to kind of like think about these things. And even if they don't reach the same conclusions, at least think about it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I find myself in a position now that I have a larger audience to speak that to. And that also is derived from the skills I gained from being a teacher for over a decade, that I'm able to take very complicated ideas and express it in a way, hopefully, that is not like telling you, you know, you're going to go to hell if you don't believe in what I believe in, but more in like, yo, man, like, you ever consider this? And if you haven't, why do you think you never have? And then how does that shape who we think we are? And how does it shape the way how others see you? And when you have that conversation, no longer are we talking about simply black and white. It's no longer we're talking about like, you know, where you're from even. We're talking about like, how are you dealing with what this is now? What are you doing about it? And you, like I said, might not reach the same conclusion, but you're going to have to understand why we're not reaching the same conclusion. And yeah, man, I think that goes to the very guts of it.
Yeah, I like that part. That sounds like a daunting task, my man. Do you know, just shaping the mind of someone that may or not have awareness of what is actually going on out there?
Well, think about it. If you were in school and you had a teacher that like challenged you like that, you'd be like, oh, I love this.
Yeah.
Even though it's not like perfect every single day, even though you might get annoyed that you're asked to read and write every day, but after a while, it's like, oh, I want to do this.
Yeah.
And I saw that with children in the city of Philadelphia and like places like Kensington and Germantown, that this society just has like basically like disregarded, maybe uplift some of them to point out the fact that something's wrong with the rest of y'all. But I've seen, again, some of the most brilliant people kind of like, oh, and tell me even years later how much they appreciated being in a space like that. And very few people, I think, like have that point of reference, which for me, like I do not take for granted, because I came into teaching over a decade ago saying, if I can just reach one kid in 10 years, I've made it. And being there and seeing and running into them still, seeing all that come to fruition, that circle almost, it's like, oh snap, like it was something special about that.
Yeah, it's like exercise. The first teacher that I ever encountered was a Black gentleman. This was at Monco. You began your schooling journey post high school at Monco as well,
Yes,
right?
I did.
Yeah, and it was a sociology teacher, a Black teacher. I could tell that he was, I don't think he was where you were at with it, but I could tell he was kind of grappling with how do you reach, people like me and deliver that message without it being just that, in the classroom to the point where it's turning everyone else off, so I could tell he's fighting with that, and I appreciate it. And he was the first teacher, honestly, that I felt like really reached me in a way where I felt like a connection to that person, which was, interesting. So I would imagine that if you're going through it with this awareness, it's happening, when you're trying to make a connection in most cases, unless people are not wanting to connect.
Exactly. And I like I was saying earlier, like I learned so much from the students I've taught, like over 1,000 of them, from places where a lot of people would never even walk down their block, view their parents, view them as something is wrong. And I learned from so many of them, to the point where it's like, I even feel like a deeper commitment where even that I'm not in the classroom now, and I find myself like being able to influence what is actually should be taught in those classrooms, puts me in a position now. It's like I can't forget what those students told me about the journey as a teacher that I went through and what they wanted to hear and why it's so important. And it doesn't even matter what racial or ethnic identity those children were. They need it too, because how can you make sense out of this society if you don't get that? And that's how it just influences the whole orientation that I have right now.
Yeah. Do you feel like what's the get back for you? Not that you're looking to get something back, but what is it that you received? Or that you do receive?
Well, I mean, I just, it's weird. It's like kind of the idea is like, people say keep up the good fight, all that. But it's also this idea of like, it's a lot of affirming things. So things I knew to be true as a child, a little bit like I knew in my gut. A lot of that has been affirmed over time, not in the sense of like affirming based off of me needing to feel good about myself, but like seeing the world, interacting with different types of people, like trying to like navigate. It has made very clear how much I was already like on the right track. I think, even what you're expressing right now and some of the other folks that I've known, they always say, Ishmael, you're always on that stuff. And it's like, I understand what you were talking about more now. And for me, it's just like, damn, like I am trying to just be honest about what I see and making sense out of what I'm like looking at in the world, what I've experienced, and then also what I'm reading from other people who have real deep insights from their own experiences in this life.
Yeah, I think you do it in a way. I want to use the word humble. If you can you think of a better word than humble? Because I'm trying to think of a way, like the way you present it, it has a humbleness to it. Like, again, I would say like a gift, as if you're giving someone, because you're trying to expose them to something and not force it down their throat. So like when I'm receiving the message, and I imagine a lot of people when they're getting this, I assume again it's why there's not much pushback. It's because of the way that you're delivering it, and it seems like you do it some knowingly and unknowingly. Like it's a part of who you are, but you've come to realize that this mechanism is the best way to get people to receive it.
Yeah, and again, that's not something I purposely have pursued. You know what I mean? There's some people that go out in the world and be like, how can I convince or sell people something?
That
you know
part.
What I mean? Like people go to college for that, got doctorates.
Yeah, there's a lot of resistance to that,
Yeah. Oh, well, and even there's also a lot of acceptance. If you see, why do they spend hundreds of millions of dollars on commercials to make us like buy something or believe an idea? Just because that works. And I didn't go, I like, that's not my purpose. My purpose is like, just continue that divine conversation with higher power, the divine conversation with our ancestors, and then even the divine conversation amongst my peers and the youth and my elders. And it's ongoing. It never stops. It's a circle. we've been tricked to believe that this is like a straight line, linear type style. It ain't like that. Something, our ancestors, many ancestors, have left us. It's a circle and it's a spiral. It keeps on going. And one thing you might know at one point, you might know something about it deeper as you get older.
Yeah.
And for me, that's just what has definitely informed why I try to approach it the way I do. It's like Malcolm even said, there was a time that you didn't know what you do now. Like, why are you looking down at another one? Of course, I'm paraphrasing, but it's this idea that like, a wise man that knows something knows that they know nothing at all. So who do you think you are to look down at someone else simply because they don't know what you know now?
Yeah, that part. Yeah. You just explained it in an even better way. Yeah, I think that comes across in the messaging. Whereas some people, like, again, you've done so much schooling, and you've learned so much knowledge. Where it's like, it's not like that is who you are. It's a part of your identity. Where some people, they feel like that is their identity, and that's who they're. And I get it, because
Tied to their ego.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And that part, and that comes through when you're communicating with them. You can tell that they feel like, it's a different way of communicating, and I think it works.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think.
And don't get it twisted. Like, I feel like that sometimes.
Yeah, I bet.
But I understand. Like, I remind myself, like, who the heck do you think you are?
Yeah.
Like, nah, bro.
Yeah, I feel like that comes across, like, for me, and I imagine a lot of people, whatever that is, just as humans in general, because I've learned this recently. Like, as humans, we seek to connect, and we're also looking for points of rejection. I'm paraphrasing something that I read in a book too. And you get that through conversation as well. We're looking for points of connection. Yep. And when we get that point of rejection, it's a no, bro. You know what I mean?
Yep.
This conversation is over. I can't hear you. I don't like the way you said that, like any part of that.
Yep.
And if you're conscious of that while you're delivering a real deep topic that has a lot of nuance to it, yeah, you're going to connect with people. And that for you, bro,
yeah.
I think you got it, especially because I've seen you evolve and develop, from afar, but your online persona or whatever, and knowing you from a child and seeing you work through some of, the feelings that you had to deal with and probably still do to get where you are now.
Oh, I appreciate that, brother.
You're doing it. And I wanted to ask you another question, like, how does it feel to have gone through all that you've gone through, all the schooling, and to get here to this moment and to see that it's worked, like you chose the right path for you, and you're able to regurgitate some of that information and give it to the world?
I mean, I view it as, again, a responsibility. Mm-hmm. Would I rather not be up sometimes till 10 o'clock at night, or take that 7 o'clock meeting with an outside organization that I'm trying to collaborate with, or, take the easy way out in my job and just like check off the boxes and minimum on what I need to do? I mean, those are the easier routes. But like, for me, it becomes this heavy burden. It's like, well, you can't ignore it. You just simply can't stand on the sideline. And for that, it just pushes me to continue, being the best person I can be, and go back to the drawing board if the theory don't work out right, and then reapproach it and take in information and learn from folks even who I disagree with about why they might disagree, and understand that so I can speak to it. One thing I did as a teacher when I first started teaching, I used to be super critical of like my contemporary hip hop artists. And I remember, like, Meek Mills, I would say Weak Mills.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah,
Drake,
yeah,
I would say
Uh-huh.
Flake.
Mm-hmm.
And one student's like, he's like, Jimenez, you talking all this smack. He's like, do you even like listen to them? Like, what they talking about? They be saying some stuff is deep. Mm-hmm. And so then I realized, oh snap, I need to go back and listen to details, be able to speak to authority, like understand why it does appeal, not just condemn because it does.
Yeah.
And that gave me a whole nother layer. And I gotta give a shout out to that student, because that student also like checked me on other things somewhat early in my career to allow me to become a better teacher.
Yeah.
And if I didn't listen to him, if I thought I knew everything and that he needed to learn and stay in his place, I would have never been as effective as I became or as effective as I am now. But like recognizing that and recognizing all those pieces, I think sometimes, again, it probably feeds into how we are indoctrinated within this society. We like to tell ourselves, oh, I did all that on my own. Like I learned, I would have got that regardless. It's like, nah, bro, you got it because you were listening.
Yeah, shout out to you though, bro,
Yeah.
because in that moment, like you said, you got all these accolades and the years of work and experience, and this is a younger person, telling you something. So for you to be vulnerable enough to, to have the openness to be able to receive that message, whether it was in the moment or afterthought,
Yep.
good for you, because, we've all been there. And
Yeah, that's hard.
I'm a stubborn person coming up. Like I'm just evolving into the person where I am now, where it's a little, what did we call it earlier? Giving grace to all things, including myself.
Yeah.
It's an evolving process.
Yes, it
You know
is.
what I mean? So to be able to be that person for you, man, good for you.
Oh, I appreciate it, bro.
Good for you. You're the man out here. Like,
Man, I appreciate it.
I know I keep saying it over and over again, but this is my true feeling about it, because I understand, like, the work is the work, right? In all aspects of life. Like, the work is the work. So to see someone doing the work in that arena at that level, we get it, and you spoke about greatness earlier, and I'm just going to slide off here. I think when Kobe Bryant, when he passed away, I didn't know why I was so upset. I just kind of realized that in these moments, it's because of that greatness, that thing, at least the perceived greatness, that someone, the work that they put in, where they got to, and knowing that is possible. Again, not being a basketball player, but just in life in general, and that feeling. So, for you out there doing that, showing other people that it can be done, seeing you do the work in that arena, like, I imagine you're going to inspire someone,
If I inspire one person, bro, that's all it needs.
Yeah. Which is the humble answer, right? Of course we want, and that is true. If you inspire just one person, great.
Yeah.
But we know that you're gonna.
Let's hope, man.
Inspire.
It's like sometimes it feels like 2 steps forward, 3 steps back up in this game.
Yeah.
It feels sometimes that you are at a place and then you realize and like, oh, that's just in that bubble. And
I got you.
It's that's why, when you asked me to come speak to you today, I was like, like, I know that there's folks watching this, John, that would never even hear of any of this conversation if you didn't put it out there.
Yeah.
And it comes from many different angles. It's not simply one shot. A lot of people confine Malcolm X's "by any means necessary" to mean like using violence. No, Malcolm X was basically saying, if it takes nonviolence, if it takes this, if it takes by any means necessary, we'll get free, and be recognized as human beings. So like having that type of mentality and having that applied to all the work that we do and approach, we just need to get to the point to realize like it ain't all good. We're not headed in any direction that is good for our babies in the future. What are we doing now to become our children, their children's ancestors that they can point to and say, like, our ancestors created the conditions for who I am today?
Yeah. This question is going. It's a broad stroke here, and there's no definitive answer. But I'm wondering, what does a W look like for you in this arena? Like, if you could get to a point where you feel like, the work I did.
What would that be?
Yeah, I imagine there's been some W's, and there will be, but like the W.
Well, I mean, my W would be like equity and justice for folks, regardless of who they are or what circumstances they find themselves in. Another W would be just like a correction of kind of the historical interruption that our folks experience, which is in the scope of humanity a very short amount of time, and righting that ship. Another W is just really lay the groundwork for a viable alternative to kind of the worldview that informs what it is today. When people politicians and everything put it out there like, oh, well, the left and no, we're not talking about that. We're talking about the affirmation of humanity, and there's aspects of that within groups, but then there's also other aspects of it being the opposite of that. So for me, it's just like being able to create that and to confirm the validity of that counter narrative, that experience that our people have had and have fought back against and fought for all rights of all people, being much more clear in the sense of what we're going to be facing in the future. Because, you know, as resources get more scarce, as rumors of war spread everywhere, it's not going to get good, man. And if we're not preparing our children to deal with that and to imagine something different, we're going to look around one day with no imagination, stuck within something that we think we just got to continue because that's the way it's always been.
Yeah, 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 you're right. Especially when you the weight of that, you know, feeling that stuck feeling like, what can I do? Or,
Yeah.
you know, who do I know? You're like, where do I go to with this feeling or any of that? Yeah, that's why I feel like really you play an integral role, even if it's just in that space. I personally believe it's only a matter of time. You know, like you know how it works. The message is gonna reach the people that it needs to reach.
I hope so, bro.
Yeah,
I hope
absolutely. If you know, just continue going.
Yes,
I
sir.
had another question I wanted to ask you. Oh yeah, are you good to keep going?
Yeah, yeah.
Your position. So obviously, this W, I imagine, happens if there's more people that occupy the position that you occupy. What exactly is that role again?
Well, I run social studies curriculum for, you know, a large district, but I also teach adjunct at major university and other universities before around teacher preparation programs. So really, it's not only creating the circumstances where teachers are given the tools, the resources, and the knowledge necessary to speak with authority with their students and exchange that open dialogue, but it's also preparing them to what that might look like. You know, a large majority of folks who go into teaching either go in with a romanticized idea of like, I want to replicate the experience I had, which usually co-signs the dominant, you know, ideas of this culture. Or it's kind of like, you know, I didn't like school, I'm trying to give the education. And those are usually the teachers that are more open to learning something different and realizing what's going on isn't working. I think we need more people with that. We need more people with courage to care more about humanity than a paycheck. I think that we also just need to be very eyes wide open about who isn't working in our interest, and being able to point that out, not in the way of condemning others for saying, you know, you support that person or whatever individualistic idea, but it's like, okay, so like, what are you trying to produce? And like your question, like, what's the W for you overall? Like, that's a hard question, because a lot of people just fight for the sake of fighting, which things I've been accused of before. And it's like, I'm not fighting. And so I had to personally wrestle with that. And, you know, and that's why for me, at the end of the day, that conclusion is just like creating conditions or more circumstances or more crawl spaces for folks to imagine something different. Because right now, we ain't doing that, bruh. And where we headed ain't all good, so.
Yeah, you're right. The way you just painted that picture, just even saying just to imagine something different, because you can't, you know, even me just sitting here, you just can't fathom it without like a large scale change of people doing what you do, or a system that is really willing to grapple with the idea that it even needs changing, you know? And like who wants
that?
Yeah, the powers that be don't want that. Like, you know, it's a disruption in a system that viable, working or not, it's happening, you know? So
exactly. We didn't create this world, bro. We were just brought up into it and then asked to make sense out. I mean, like, and I try to explain that to all groups of people, regardless of who they are. And it's like, we didn't make this, bro, but we're living in it. And it's like, what are you doing right now to make that different? Or are you okay with it the way it is? And why are you okay with it the way it is? Is it sustainable?
Yeah.
All those questions.
Yeah. This question is going to be kind of personal. I wanted to ask you, how do you feel personally? Because I know, let me use me first, put it on me. When I used to think about people, I'll just say friends or acquaintances, people close to me that I didn't feel like were active or doing something, I took issue with that. And I really did. But now, you know, having a child, I realize people are going to do what they're going to do. Their life is their life. They have their choices. And again, going back to just giving grace. But how do you feel about people that are basically on the sidelines, knowing that there is a fight, but aren't engaging? Do you have any feelings about that at all?
I used to have more feelings when I was a kid.
Yeah, I bet.
I would say more, it's like, you know, you got time to learn. It's like, at the end of the day, what legacy are you leaving? And I ain't talking about generational wealth. I'm talking about, like, what legacy are you leaving for the overall struggle that our ancestors are part of, that we're part of. And for me, that's what it has become. It has, you know, transferred into this idea. It's like, okay, that's all well and good, but like, I'm still learning. Hopefully you're engaged in that process. And, you know, when it's all done and with, I think that we should be able to lay down in peace and be like, I did as much as I could within my circumstance.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I'm going to simplify that, but it's basically, to me, it's like, are you just occupying space or are you doing something? Yeah, I get it. That's my perspective.
Are you an object or a subject?
Yeah.
Because an object, when it's no longer needed, what happens to it?
Yeah, it's gone.
Yeah, it's gone. And it's because an object is defined by the subject. And the subject is the thing in existence, in the circumstances, trying to like define things. Like, some people can like point to a cell phone and be like, oh, that's a cell phone. Another person will be like, what are you talking about? It's my paperweight.
Yeah.
But that cell phone ain't going to argue with you because it's an object. Only the subject can define. So we need to be subjects in this story.
Yeah, I dig it, man. I dig it. Having the type of power that you have, I know you don't view it as power. You try not to view it as power, but it is a power, right? Because you can shape the minds, and you know, anytime that you have that leverage, it's a mechanism that you are in control of. I imagine that there's other people that have opinions based on how it goes. Like, you're not the end all be all of that, but you're at the top of that, obviously. But what is that? What is that like? You get what I'm trying to say? Did I make sense of that at all?
Draining.
Yeah.
Disillusioning.
Okay.
Yeah. It was much easier to be a teacher. It's like you can't feel full glasses. Like, folks already walking in the circumstances think they know it all already, which there's a lot of that, especially in education. For me, and it's disillusion, because it's like, I thought you're good people, but you're telling me you're just doing your job, but just doing your job perpetuates the horribleness that goes down. So, and the nonsense that goes down. So for me, it's been a combination, it's layered, and it's not, you know, one thing or one person or a group of people. It becomes a malaise of things, of combination of confusion. And you just realize, and as you get older, and you're probably realizing this, it's like, most people don't know what the heck they're doing. They're just going, they're just living their lives. And and it becomes, okay, you're just living your life. What does that mean? Like, who are you and what do you stand for? Why do you stand for those things? And we need to start asking our children that question much earlier.
Yeah, that's interesting and complex too, because it's not like you're working at a place where you're just making tires or coffee mugs. You know, like, what you're engaged in is.
Well, don't get it twisted. If I was doing that, I'd be talking that smack behind that coffee counter.
Yeah, for sure. Well, you know what I mean. Like, let me say, I don't want to say the importance, but the the collaborative effort is extremely important, that all parties are viewing things through the same lens, as opposed to working somewhere where who gives a shit what these people, you know what I mean?
Cares,
Where, you know, like you guys working together and harmony is needed. So yeah, I would imagine there's a lot of, it's a struggle.
Yeah, definitely is, bro.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I ain't gonna drag you too deep in those waters, but I just want to thank you very much for coming on, man, for giving me the time,
definitely.
for showing up, for just, to me, like when I reached out to you, I really didn't know, because again, I view you, and I don't know if it's because I never noticed, if it's because I like the person, the content, or I really can't put it, but I see you as, you know what I mean? Like you're moving, you're up there. So for you to come down here and, you know, just deliver your message, maybe hopefully give you a little bit more exposure to a different group too.
Yeah.
But thank you very much for coming up, chopping it up, for taking the time, for coming out here.
Of course, bro.
Appreciate
You know,
it very
anytime.
All right, that's it.
All right.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Like, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff. We'd like to thank you for tuning in to The Awakened Avoidant. We hope our convo has provided you with insight, inspiration, and healing energy. As you go about your week, let's continue to work together to heal ourselves and our community. Stay safe and continue to spread healing vibes wherever you go. Catch a new episode Wednesday weekly on all platforms.